Welcome to this examination of the Vietnam War, its history, conflict, protest, and aftermath. We will explore one of the most controversial conflicts in American history, from its colonial origins to its lasting legacy. This program is brought to you by the Series of Thoughts team, as part of the History series. Part 1 covers the origins and U.S. involvement. We will understand how a Cold War policy transformed into America's longest and most divisive 20th century conflict. The roots of the conflict lie in France's late 19th century colonization of Vietnam, which fueled strong Vietnamese nationalism. Ho Chi Minh founded the Viet Minh in 1941 to fight for independence. French colonial rule ended decisively after their defeat at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954. The 1954 Geneva Accords temporarily divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel. The North was led by Ho Chi Minh and the South by Ngo Dinh Diem. The U.S. backed South Vietnam, fearing a communist victory in the planned reunification elections, which were subsequently never held. Early U.S. involvement began in the 1950s with the dispatch of military advisors to train South Vietnamese forces. This was driven by the domino theory, which warned that if one nation fell to communism, its neighbors would follow. President Kennedy escalated this commitment, increasing advisors to 16,000 by 1961. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964, involving alleged attacks on U.S. destroyers, provided the catalyst for escalation. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, granting President Johnson broad war powers and initiating direct U.S. military engagement and sustained bombing of North Vietnam. Part 2 focuses on the escalation and the war on the ground, examining how the conflict intensified from limited engagement to full-scale combat and the brutal realities of guerrilla warfare. Operation Rolling Thunder began in March 1965 as a massive bombing campaign against North Vietnam aimed at disrupting supply lines. U.S. ground troop numbers swelled dramatically, reaching 543,000 by 1969, transforming the mission into America's largest post-World War II military operation. The Viet Cong employed effective guerrilla warfare tactics, including extensive underground tunnel networks like Siu Chi. Their unconventional tactics, such as ambushes and booby traps, frustrated the conventional U.S. military. The 1968 Tet Offensive shocked Americans, challenging official claims of progress. The human cost was staggering. Over 58,000 U.S. soldiers were killed, and more than 2 million Vietnamese died, including many civilians. The war caused immense destruction, displacing millions and leaving long-term environmental damage from chemical defoliants like Agent Orange. The My Lai massacre on March 16, 1968, saw U.S. soldiers kill hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians. Exposed in 1969, the atrocity fundamentally changed American perception of the war, fueling anti-war outrage and raising serious questions about accountability. Part 3 focuses on protest politics and division at home, covering how the war sparked unprecedented domestic opposition and reshaped American society and politics. The anti-war movement began on college campuses with teach-ins and expanded rapidly. As the bombing intensified, counterculture embraced anti-war activism. Prominent figures like Muhammad Ali publicly refused military service on moral grounds. The 1967 March on the Pentagon mobilized approximately 100,000 protesters. The march symbolized a shift to mass national dissent. A defining image showed a protester placing a flower in a soldier's rifle barrel, symbolizing nonviolent resistance. The selective service system, or the draft, forced young men into military service, causing widespread resentment. Unequal deferments meant working class and minority youth bore a disproportionate risk. Resistance grew, marked by draft card burnings and thousands fleeing to Canada. The 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago became a violent flashpoint where anti-war protesters clashed with police. This chaos was broadcast nationwide, shocking Americans and revealing deep fractures within the political establishment regarding the war. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in his Beyond Vietnam speech in 1967, publicly denounced the war as morally unjust and racist, highlighting its disproportionate impact on Black Americans and the poor. His stance linked anti-war activism with the broader civil rights movement. Protest songs became the soundtrack of dissent. Folk artists like Bob Dylan and Joan Baez conveyed anti-war messages. Rock anthems such as Fortunate Son captured anger at the draft's inequality, while John Lennon's "Give Peace a Chance" became an international rallying cry. Part 4 explores the war's end and lasting legacy, examining how the conflict concluded and its profound, enduring impact on America and Vietnam. President Nixon introduced Vietnamization to shift combat duties to South Vietnamese forces while drawing down U.S. troops. The Paris Peace Accords were signed in January 1973, officially ending U.S. involvement, though fighting between North and South continued. The war ended on April 30, 1975, when North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon. The city was renamed Ho Chi Minh City, and Vietnam was reunified under communist control. The chaotic final days saw over 130,000 South Vietnamese refugees flee. The war's aftermath included lasting health crises from Agent Orange exposure, unexploded ordnance that continues to harm civilians, and severe psychological scars among veterans, including high rates of PTSD and inadequate support. The war had significant political consequences. It consumed Lyndon Johnson's presidency, leading him not to seek re-election. It also contributed to a deep mistrust in government institutions and a lasting skepticism toward official narratives and executive power. The Vietnam Syndrome describes the American reluctance to engage in foreign military interventions following the war. Military planners adopted new doctrines emphasizing clear objectives, exit strategies, and public support, lessons that still shape foreign policy debates. The U.S. and Vietnam normalized diplomatic relations in 1995, transforming from enemies to economic partners. Today, the nations collaborate extensively on trade and addressing war legacy issues, including Agent Orange cleanup. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial, dedicated in 1982, lists the names of over 58,000 Americans killed or missing in action. Memorials and educational programs ensure that new generations understand the conflict's complex history and human cost. Public opinion shifted dramatically during the war, moving from 61% support in 1965 to just 28% by 1971. The conflict created deep national divisions, with the, quote, silent majority and vocal protesters symbolizing a nation fundamentally polarized over the war's necessity. Vietnam became the first television war, with graphic combat footage broadcast nightly into American homes. Media figures like Walter Cronkite profoundly shaped national discourse. His on-air skepticism about victory reportedly shook President Johnson's confidence. The war saw significant internal military dissent, including combat refusals and fragging incidents, where troops attacked their own officers. Anti-war newspapers circulated on bases, reflecting a widespread breakdown in discipline and morale. Vietnam taught painful lessons about the importance of understanding local contexts before military intervention. It demonstrated the limits of military power in achieving political objectives, especially against an insurgency with popular support. Nick Utt's photograph of 9-year-old Phan Thi Kim Phuc fleeing a napalm attack captured the war's human face. Her image galvanized global anti-war sentiment by vividly conveying the horrific suffering of civilians. The Vietnam moratorium on October 15, 1969, brought millions of Americans into the streets in the largest coordinated anti-war demonstration in history. It demonstrated that opposition to the war had moved from the fringe to the mainstream. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial creates a powerful space for mourning and remembrance. Its reflective design and the personal mementos left by visitors transform it into a living tribute to the immense sacrifice and loss of the war. The Vietnam War fundamentally transformed American foreign policy and stands as a cautionary tale about the limits of military solutions. The power of dissent demonstrated by the anti-war movement continues to shape debates about military intervention, executive power, and social justice today.